Angina pectoris. Angina pectoris is a symptom complex caused by transient myocardial ischemia, which occurs whenever there is an imbalance between myocardial oxygen supply and demand. Pathogenesis. Atherosclerosis is by far the most common cause of angina pectoris. Angina may also occur in aortic valve disease and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and when the coronary arteries are involved with vasculitis or aortitis. The underlying mechanisms and risk factors for atherosclerosis have already been discussed. Approximately 10% of patients who report stable angina on effort have normal coronary arteries on angiography. The main causes are discussed in more detail below. Coronary artery spasm. Angina may result from vasospasm of the coronary arteries. This may coexist with atherosclerosis, especially in unstable angina, but may occur as an isolated phenomenon in less than 1% of cases. In patients with normal coronary arteries on angiography, this is sometimes known as variant angina, when it is accompanied by transient ST elevation on the ECG. It is termed Prinzmetal's angina. Syndrome X. The constellation of typical angina on effort, objective evidence of myocardial ischemia on stress testing, and normal coronary arteries on angiography is sometimes known as Syndrome X. Many of these patients are women, and the mechanism of their symptoms is often unclear. This disorder is poorly understood. It carries a good prognosis but may respond to antianginal therapy. Other causes. Angina can occur in association with aortic stenosis, hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, and aortitis, all of which are discussed in more detail later in this chapter. It may also rarely be found in association with vasculitis. Now, factors influencing myocardial oxygen supply and demand. Oxygen demand, cardiac work, heart rate, blood pressure, myocardial contractility, left ventricular hypertrophy, valve disease. Oxygen supply, coronary blood flow, duration of diastole, coronary perfusion pressure, aortic diastolic minus coronary sinus or right atrial diastolic pressure. Coronary vasomotor tone, oxygenation, hemoglobin oxygen saturation. Coronary blood flow occurs mainly in diastole. Now, activities precipitating angina. Common: physical exertion, cold exposure, heavy meals, intense emotion. Uncommon: vivid dreams, nocturnal angina, lying flat, decubitus angina. Now, Canadian Cardiovascular Society (CCS) angina score. Class 1: angina only during strenuous or prolonged physical activity. Class 2: slight limitation with angina only during vigorous physical activity. Class 3: moderate limitation where symptoms occur with everyday activities. Class 4: inability to perform any activity without angina or angina at rest, that is severe limitation. Now, clinical features. The history is the most important factor in making the diagnosis. Stable angina is characterized by central chest pain, discomfort or breathlessness that is predictably precipitated by exertion or other forms of stress and is promptly relieved by rest. Some patients find the discomfort comes when they start walking and later it does not return despite greater effort. It is called warm-up angina. What is warm-up angina? The Canadian Cardiovascular Society scoring system is commonly used to grade the severity of angina. This is of clinical value not only in documenting the severity of angina but also in assessing prognosis. Physical examination is frequently unremarkable but should include a careful search for evidence of valve disease, particularly aortic. Important risk factors: hypertension, diabetes mellitus, left ventricular dysfunction, cardiomegaly, gallop rhythm. Other manifestations of arterial disease: carotid bruit, peripheral arterial disease, and unrelated conditions that may exacerbate angina, anemia, thyrotoxicosis. Now the investigations. Symptoms are a poor guide to the extent of coronary artery disease. Because of this, stress testing and non-invasive imaging are advisable in patients who are potential candidates for revascularization. An algorithm for the investigation and treatment of patients with stable angina is shown in figure 1655. The first line investigation is an exercise ECG, which should be performed using a standard treadmill or bicycle ergometer protocol while monitoring the patient's pulse, blood pressure, and general condition. Planar or downsloping ST segment depression of 1 millimeter or more is indicative of ischemia. Upsloping ST depression is less specific. It often occurs in normal individuals, and false positive results can occur with digoxin therapy, left ventricular hypertrophy, bundle branch block, and WPW syndrome. The amount of exercise that can be tolerated and the extent of ST segment change that occurs can be of value in identifying high-risk individuals with severe coronary disease in combination with other clinical features. However, exercise testing may be normal in a significant proportion of patients with coronary artery disease, or may be inconclusive because an adequate heart rate cannot be achieved due to reduced mobility or other non-cardiac problems. Accordingly, if clinical suspicion is high and the exercise ECG is normal or inconclusive, further imaging with myocardial perfusion scanning or stress echocardiography is indicated. A perfusion defect may present during stress but not at rest provides evidence of reversible myocardial ischemia, whereas a persistent perfusion defect seen during both phases of the study is usually indicative of previous MI. Increasingly, CT coronary arteriography is being used to document the presence or absence of coronary artery disease in patients with suspected angina. It can clarify the diagnosis, help to guide optimal treatment, and avoid the need for cardiac catheterization in patients who do not have coronary artery disease or who have mild disease only. Coronary angiography provides detailed anatomical information about the extent and nature of coronary artery disease. It is usually performed when coronary artery bypass graft surgery or percutaneous coronary intervention is being considered. Now, the risk stratification in stable angina. The high-risk patient post-infarct angina, poor effort tolerance, ischemia at low workload, left main or three vessel disease, poor left ventricular function. The low-risk people are predictable exertional angina, good effort tolerance, ischemia only at high workload, single vessel or two vessel disease, good left ventricular function. Patients may fall between these two categories. Now, the management. This should begin with a careful explanation of the problem and a discussion of the lifestyle and medical interventions that can be deployed to relieve symptoms and improve prognosis. Anxiety and misconceptions often contribute to disability. For example, some patients avoid all forms of exertion because they believe that each attack of angina is a mini heart attack that results in permanent damage. Education and reassurance can dispel these misconceptions and make a huge difference to the patient's quality of life. The principles of management involve a careful assessment of the extent and severity of arterial disease, identification and treatment of risk factors, advice on smoking cessation, introduction of drug treatment for symptom control, identification of high-risk patients for treatment to improve life expectancy. This is a diagram for investigation and treatment of stable angina on effort. Clinical consultation, history and examination, blood test and 12-lead ECG, consider chest X-ray and echocardiography. Consider exercise ECG. Clear diagnosis of angina. If yes, then obstructive coronary artery disease, preventative therapies, anti-anginal therapy, and consider invasive coronary angiography plus minus revascularization. If no, then non-anginal chest pain and normal ECG. No. Computed tomography, coronary angiography. It may be no coronary artery disease, may be non-obstructive coronary artery disease, may be obstructive coronary artery disease. If non-anginal chest pain and normal ECG, then it is no coronary artery disease. If no coronary artery disease, then consider alternative diagnosis. If non-obstructive coronary artery disease, then consider preventive therapies. If obstructive coronary artery disease, then preventive therapies, anti-anginal therapy. If needed, consider invasive coronary angiography plus minus revascularization. This figure shows forms of exercise-induced ST depression. AECG shows planar ST depression is usually indicative of myocardial ischemia. Downsloping depression also usually indicates myocardial ischemia. Upsloping depression may be a normal finding. Now, advice to patients with stable angina. Do not smoke. Aim for an ideal body weight. Take regular exercise. Exercise up to but not beyond the point of chest discomfort is beneficial and may promote collateral vessels. Avoid severe unaccustomed exertion and vigorous exercise after a heavy meal or in very cold weather. Take sublingual nitrate before undertaking exertion that may induce angina. All patients with angina secondary to coronary artery disease should receive antiplatelet therapy. Low-dose 75 mg aspirin should be prescribed for all patients and continued indefinitely since it reduces the risk of MI. Clopidogrel 75 mg daily is an equally effective alternative if aspirin causes dyspepsia or other side effects. Similarly, all patients should be prescribed a statin even if cholesterol is normal. Now, anti-anginal drug therapy. The goal of anti-anginal therapy is to control symptoms using a regimen that is as simple as possible and does not cause side effects. 5 groups of drug can be used in the prevention and treatment of angina, but there is little evidence that one group is more effective than another. It is conventional to start therapy with sublingual glyceryl trinitrate (GTN) and a beta blocker, and then add a calcium channel antagonist or a long-acting nitrate if needed. If the combination of two drugs fails to achieve an acceptable symptomatic response, revascularization should be considered. Nitrates act directly on vascular smooth muscle to produce venous and arteriolar dilatation. Several preparations are available. They help angina by lowering preload and afterload, which reduces myocardial oxygen demand, and by increasing myocardial oxygen supply through coronary vasodilatation. Sublingual GTN administered from a metered-dose aerosol 400 microgram per spray or as a tablet 300 or 500 microgram is indicated for acute attacks and will usually relieve an attack in 2 to 3 minutes. Patients should also be encouraged to use the drug prophylactically before taking exercise that is liable to provoke symptoms. Sublingual GTN has a short duration of action and side effects include headache, symptomatic hypotension, and rarely syncope. A more prolonged therapeutic effect can be achieved by giving GTN transcutaneously as a patch 5 to 10 mg daily or a slow release buccal tablet 1 to 5 mg 4 times daily. Isosorbate dinitrate 10 to 20 mg 3 times daily and isosorbate mononitrate 20 to 60 mg once or twice daily can be given by mouth, unlike GTN which undergoes extensive metabolism in the liver. Headache is common with oral nitrates but tends to diminish if the patient perseveres with the treatment. Continuous nitrate therapy can cause pharmacological tolerance, but this can be avoided by a 6 to 8 hour nitrate-free period, best achieved at night when the patient is inactive. If nocturnal angina is a predominant symptom, Long-acting nitrates can be given at the end of the day. A positive exercise test, chest leads only. The resting 12-lead ECG shows some minor T-wave changes in the inferolateral leads but is otherwise normal. After 3 minutes exercise on a treadmill, there is marked planar ST depression in lead B4 and B5, right hand offset. Subsequent coronary angiography revealed critical 3-vessel coronary artery disease. It is a myocardial perfusion scan showing reversible anterior myocardial ischemia. The images are cross-sectional tomograms of the left ventricle. The resting scans left show even uptake of the 99 technetium level tetrophosphine and look like donuts. During stress, there is reduced uptake of technetium, particularly along the anterior wall, arrows, and the scans look like crescents, right? This is at rest and during stress. Now, beta blockers. These lower myocardial oxygen demand by reducing heart rate, blood pressure, and myocardial contractility, but they may provoke bronchospasm in patients with asthma. The properties and side effects of beta blockers are discussed on page 500. In theory, non-selective beta blockers may aggravate coronary vasospasm by blocking coronary artery beta-2 adrenoceptors, and so a once-daily cardioselective preparation such as slow-release metoprolol 50 to 200 mg daily or bisoprolol 5 to 15 mg daily is preferable. Beta blockers should not be withdrawn abruptly, as rebound effects may precipitate dangerous arrhythmias, worsening angina or MI. This is known as the beta blocker withdrawal syndrome. Calcium channel antagonist. These drugs lower myocardial oxygen demand by reducing blood pressure and myocardial contractility. Since dihydropyridine calcium antagonists such as nifedipine and amlodipine may cause a reflex tachycardia, it is best to use them in combination with a beta blocker. In contrast, verapamil and diltiazem can be used as monotherapy because they slow ST node firing, inhibit conduction through the AV node, and tend to cause bradycardia. They are particularly useful when beta blockers are contraindicated. Calcium channel antagonists reduce myocardial contractility and must be used with care in patients with poor LV function, since they can aggravate or precipitate heart failure. Other unwanted effects include peripheral edema, flushing, headache, and dizziness. Potassium channel activators. Nicorandil 10 to 30 mg twice daily orally is the only drug in this class that is currently available for clinical use. It acts as a vasodilator with effects on the arterial and venous systems, and has the advantage that it does not exhibit the tolerance seen with nitrates. IF channel antagonist ivabradine is the first of this class of drug. It induces bradycardia by modulating ion channels in the sinus node. It does not inhibit myocardial contractility and appears to be safe in patients with heart failure. Ranolazine. This drug inhibits the late inward sodium current in coronary artery smooth muscle cells, with a secondary effect on calcium flux and vascular tone, reducing angina symptoms. Calcium channel antagonist used for the treatment of angina. Nifedipine 5 to 20 mg 3 times daily. Once or twice daily slow release preparations are available. May cause marked tachycardia. Nicardipine 20 to 40 mg 3 times daily may cause less myocardial depression than the other calcium antagonist. Amlodipine 2.5 to 10 mg daily ultra long acting. Verapamil 40 to 80 mg 3 times daily commonly causes constipation. Useful antiarrhythmic properties. Diltiazem 60 to 120 mg 3 times daily. Similar antiarrhythmic properties to verapamil. Now, non-pharmacological treatments. Percutaneous coronary intervention. Percutaneous coronary intervention (PCI) involves passing a fine guide wire across a coronary stenosis under radiographic control and using it to position a balloon, which is then inflated to dilate the stenosis. This can be combined with deployment of a coronary stent, which is a piece of metallic scaffolding that can be impregnated with drugs with antiproliferative properties and that helps to maximize and maintain dilatation of a stenosed vessel. The routine use of stents in appropriate vessels reduces both acute complications and the incidence of clinically important restenosis. Treatment with PCI often provides excellent symptom control, but it does not improve survival in patients with chronic stable angina. It is mainly used in single or two vessel disease. Stenosis in bypass grafts can be dilated, as well as those in the native coronary arteries. The technique is often used to provide palliative therapy for patients with recurrent angina after coronary artery bypass grafting. The main acute complications of PCI are occlusion of the target vessel and or a side branch by thrombus or a loose flap of intima, coronary artery dissection, and consequent myocardial damage. This occurs in about 2 to 5% of procedures and can often be corrected by deploying a stent, although emergency coronary artery bypass grafting may occasionally be required if stenting is unsuccessful. Minor myocardial damage, as indicated by elevation of sensitive intracellular markers, occurs in up to 10% of cases. The main long-term complication of PCI is restenosis in up to one-third of cases. This is due to a combination of elastic recoil and smooth muscle proliferation and tends to occur within 3 months. Stenting substantially reduces the risk of restenosis, probably because it allows the operator to achieve more complete dilatation. Drug-eluting stents reduce the risk further by allowing an antiproliferative drug such as sirolimus and paclitaxel to elute slowly from the coating and prevent neointimal hyperplasia and in-stent stenosis. These are especially indicated in diabetic patients or in patients with long or calcific lesions or a small target vessel diameter. Recurrent angina, affecting up to 5 to 10% of patients receiving an intracoronary stent at 6 months, may require further PCI or bypass grafting. The risk of complications and the likely success of the procedure are closely related to the morphology of the stenosis, the experience of the operator, and the presence of important comorbidities such as diabetes and peripheral arterial disease. A good outcome is less likely if the target lesion is complex, long, eccentric, or calcified, lies on a band or within a tortuous vessel, involves a branch or contains thrombus. Adjunctive therapy with a potent platelet inhibitor such as the P2Y12 receptor antagonists clopidogrel, prasugrel, or ticagrelor in combination with aspirin and heparin improves the outcome following PCI. This is the percutaneous coronary intervention. A guide wire is advanced from the radial or femoral artery to the coronary artery under radiographic control. 1. A fine balloon catheter is then advanced over the guide wire to the stenotic coronary artery and the balloon is inflated to dilate the stenosis. 2. When this has been achieved, a stent is usually placed at the site of the stenosis to maintain patency of the artery. 3. Now, the coronary artery bypass grafting. The internal mammary arteries, radial arteries, or reversed segments of the patient's own saphenous vein can be used to bypass coronary artery stenosis. This usually involves major surgery under cardiopulmonary bypass, but in some cases grafts can be applied to the beating heart of pump surgery. The operative mortality is approximately 1.5%, but risks are higher in elder patients, those with poor left ventricular function, and those with significant comorbidities such as renal failure. Approximately 90% of patients are free of angina 1 year after coronary artery bypass grafting (CABG), but fewer than 60% of patients are asymptomatic after 5 or more years. Early postoperative angina is usually due to graft failure arising from technical problems during the operation or poor runoff due to disease in the distal native coronary vessels. Late recurrence of angina may be caused by progressive disease in the native coronary arteries or graft degeneration. Fewer than 50% of vein grafts are patent 10 years after surgery. Arterial grafts have a much better long-term patency rate. However, with more than 80% of internal mammary artery graft patent at 10 years. This has led many surgeons to consider total arterial revascularization during CABG surgery. Aspirin 75 to 150 mg daily and clopidogrel 75 mg daily both improved graft patency, and one or the other should be prescribed indefinitely. Intensive lipid lowering therapy slows the progression of disease in the native coronary arteries and bypass grafts and reduces clinical cardiovascular events. There is substantial excess cardiovascular morbidity and mortality in patients who continue to smoke after bypass grafting. Persistent smokers are twice as likely to die in the 10 years following surgery than those who give up at surgery. Survival is improved by CABG in symptomatic patients with left main stem stenosis or three-vessel coronary disease when the LAD, circumflex and right coronary arteries are involved, or two-vessel disease involving the proximal LAD coronary artery. Improvement in survival is most marked in those with impaired left ventricular function or positive stress testing prior to surgery, and in those who have undergone left internal mammary artery grafting. Neurological complications are common, with a 1 to 5% risk of perioperative stroke. Between 30 and 60% of patients develop short-term cognitive impairment that typically resolves within 6 months. There are also reports of long-term cognitive decline that may be evident in more than 30% of patients at 5 years. PCI and CABG are compared in box 1645. Now the prognosis. The prognosis of coronary artery disease is related to the number of diseased vessels and the degree of left ventricular dysfunction. A patient with single vessel disease and good left ventricular function has a 5-year survival of more than 90%. In contrast, a patient with severe left ventricular dysfunction and extensive three-vessel disease has a 5-year survival of less than 30% unless revascularization is performed. Symptoms are a poor guide to prognosis since spontaneous improvement in angina due to the development of collateral vessels is common. Nevertheless, the 5-year mortality of patients with severe angina, CCS angina scale 3 or 4, is nearly double that of patients with mild symptoms. This is the photograph of primary PCI. Here, right coronary artery is occluded. Initial angioplasty reflects that large filling defect in the right coronary artery. And the last picture C shows complete restoration of normal flow following intracoronary stenting. This is a picture of coronary artery bypass grafting. We are seeing here internal mammary artery bypass graft. There is blocked artery and saphenous vein bypass graft. Here it is three-dimensional reconstruction of multi-detector CT of the heart. The image shows the patent saphenous vein graft (SVG) to the right coronary artery. RCA, obtuse marginal branch (OM). obtuse marginal branch OM and diagonal branch LADD, and left internal mammary artery graft Lima to the left anterior descending coronary artery. This is the comparison of percutaneous coronary intervention (PCI) and coronary artery bypass grafting. Death in PCI less than 0.5%, in CABG less than 1.5%, myocardial infarction 2% in PCI, 10% in CABG, hospital stay in PCI 12 to 36 hours, CABG 5 to 8 days, return to work 2 to 5 days for PCI, 6 to 12 weeks for CABG, recurrent angina 15 to 20% at 6 months. For CABG, it is 10% at 1 year. Repeat revascularization 10 to 20% at 2 years, 2% at 2 years. Neurological complications rare. In CABG, it is common. Other complications include in PCI, there may be emergency CABG, vascular damage related to exercise. In CABG, there may be diffuse myocardial damage, infection, chest or wound pain. Myocardial infarction is defined as CKMB more than 2 of normal limit. Now, angina in old age. Incidence: coronary artery disease increases in old age and affects women almost as often as men. Comorbid conditions: anemia and thyroid disease are common and may worsen angina. Calcific aortic stenosis common and should be sought in all older people with angina. Atypical presentations: when myocardial ischemia occurs, age-related changes in myocardial compliance and diastolic relaxation can cause the presentation to be with symptoms of heart failure, such as breathlessness, rather than with chest discomfort. Angioplasty and coronary artery bypass surgery provide symptomatic relief, although with increased procedure-related morbidity and mortality. Outcome is determined by the number of diseased vessels, severity of cardiac dysfunction, and the number of concomitant diseases as much as by age itself. Thank you.